I said we have questions, and we're going to get to them shortly. But first, let's talk a little...
You keep saying that.
I keep saying that. I'm teasing you as much as the listeners. Well, the tease continues. Let's talk about retro wrestling figures for a little bit here.
Oh, boy.
I got a big pile of stuff.
Some more of them have come out recently.
Some more of them have come out. First one I'm going to ask you about is not a wrestling figure at all, but I found this interesting. Super 7, a toy line that puts out, I guess they're most known for reaction figures. These are 3 3/4 inch figures, Star Wars style. Mickey from Rocky has a figure here. You remember the movie Rocky, and you know who Mickey was?
Yeah, vaguely remember the movie Rocky. And of course, Mickey was Burgess Meredith, the trainer, the mentor of Rocky.
What was his last name?
Mickey Finn.
Mickey Goldmill. I never knew that.
I didn't know that is. I think Mickey Finn would have been better.
All right, Jim, I have here a couple figures from Zombie Sailor that came out in the last couple months. The first one was a limited edition Todd Pettingill figure in the Hasbro style, one of 1,500. Todd Pettingill now getting a figure. You mentioned earlier, underrated. Now, he was very much, at least in terms of fashion and energy, of his time, I guess you could say, for the 90s. What are your thoughts on Todd Pettingill?
Well, I said Todd was a talented guy, maybe not in the wrestling business, but it wasn't his fault that they hired him. But he was a talented radio guy, DJ, and remember at, was it 96, the Slammy Awards? 96 or 97? I think it was 96. He did a parody song, Love and Marriage. Remember the old theme to Married with Children?
Of course.
But he did it with featuring all of the WWF names and personalities. And then he changed, and it was several parody songs put together. He remembered it. He performed the whole thing live, one take, blah, 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 had written the thing himself. And he was a talented guy. He was a personality. He was local television, local radio, had that energy.
Not really local television up here, but local radio.
But I'm saying, I know he was on local radio, but I'm saying he's a guy that was like a local television guy or a local radio guy. He had that energy. He was used to going out and doing remotes. He could make something out of most things. He just didn't really know a lot about wrestling and, or how to fit into it. That's why some of the fans didn't necessarily like him. Many of the wrestling people were not necessarily happy because it was a Kevin Dunn hire. Kevin Dunn, another example where he kept telling Vince, well, we need real media personalities, not wrestling announcers. And, Michael Cole had done real news and been a war correspondent. That's how he got the job with Kevin Dunn. And I'm not knocking Michael, just stating a fact. He didn't know anything about fucking wrestling. And so Pettingill, because he was on a highly rated morning radio show at the time, well, you'd know more about it. What was it?
WPLJ. It was him and Scott Shannon.
Yeah.
Memphis' own Scott Shannon.
Yeah, Scott Shannon was friends with Lawler from way back, along with, guys like Rick Dees, who was a DJ in Memphis and blah, blah. But anyway, so Pettingill was getting at the time, this was the early mid-90s. I heard a couple $100,000 a year to work as a part-time wrestling announcer, but he didn't even do commentary. He just did interviews and stand-up shows and things like Livewire and shit. So a lot of the wrestlers at the time, this fucking guy that bops in and out is making more money than they are for taking bumps. For the announcers, this guy that does this part-time is making more money than I am going on a fucking road doing commentary with Raw, whatever. That's what some of the announcers would say. And Pettingill had one of those, I can't remember, before the internet, what was the dedicated line that you could put into somebody's house, a dedicated
ISP?
Yes, the phone line so that they could do studio quality voiceover work from their home. They didn't even have to come into the studio. And he had one of those at his house, right? So Todd got heat just because he was a guy that was being given a lot more money than everybody else for doing littler work with no experience whatsoever. Little did everybody know that would become a hallmark of the WWF and WWE in years in the future. But that was, but he was a nice guy and
good hype man. For like the pre-pay-per-view shows, or what are they called? Not pre-pay-per-view shows. The pre-game show. The
pre-game show. It used to be the Barker Channel thing.
He was good at that.
Yeah, he could hype shit up, and there's a guy on WDRB locally here in Louisville, Keith Kaiser, that he's the one that they send out to the fucking, the fish fry or the local carnival or try this at this local business. He's getting something waxed, that type of thing. He's a personality, a man for all seasons. That was Todd Pettingill. He just didn't fucking fit in much in wrestling because he didn't know anything about it.
Well, Jim, another limited edition Zombie Sailor. The line is the official Wrestling Heels and Faces figure line. Again, Hasbro style. This one is one of 1,250. 1,250 for the record. It is Slick, one of my favorites of my childhood, an underrated manager in my eyes, the Doctor of Style Slick, 6'4", 198 pounds from Fort Worth, Texas.
I do not believe he weighed 198 pounds. I believe he was every bit of 6'4".
What are your thoughts on Slick? What are your thoughts on tall managers in general? And what are your thoughts on Slick?
Well, no, Slick was, I believe, I'm going to say I met him a time or two, never spent a lot of time around him. But he wasn't a manager like 6'4" and looked like Lex Luger. He was a 6'4" and looked like a drinking straw. And he had the gift of gab and the ability to talk and blah, blah, blah. I guess in real life, he's a preacher and has been for years and years and years and years.
Well, you may not have been watching at the time. It was before you came in 93, but he became on TV once he became a preacher. He became Reverend Slick, and he saved Kamala from kimchi.
That's right. That's
and Harvey
right.
Whippleman, yeah.
But it was like Paul Bearer really being a mortician. Slick is really a preacher. But, he was good because he had that face, right? He had the expressive face, and he wasn't, as I said, big, like muscular. He was just tall, and he was more of a bean-polish person, so you wanted to see people get a hold of him. And he could still be a chicken shit manager. And, again, I didn't follow the WWF product at that point in time very closely, but Slick doesn't get a lot of attention these days because he didn't stick with it. He didn't come back and have a resurgence in WCW in the 90s, did he? Like everybody else did, get on TV one more time. He was in the gimmick battle royal, wasn't he? That's where the last time I saw him, wasn't he?
Oh, I don't remember now.
Or did I see him? I'm some way or another. I saw him a time or two in person, and it was 20 years ago. But no, I never had a problem with his performance because he was too big or whatever, and he was a hell of a talker.
Yeah, and he was one of my favorites. Him, and one of the most underrated things that shouldn't be as enjoyable as it is him and Akeem, the one-man gang, dancing to the ring. And then dancing to each other to Jive Soul Bro, his song.
I remember seeing a lot of clips of that. Yes, and Corey, I managed gang early in both of our careers. I said his career back 5 years. He'd only been in the business 3 at the time. But yeah, he was a great guy too. So they were paired well.
And remember, when they brought him in, he replaced Fred Blassie. When Fred Blassie retired from being an on-air character for the most part, he turned over his stable. He sold them to Slick. So you had a few weeks of, "Come here, Slick!" Like Fred Blassie giving him the blessing. And when he first came in, he was the coolest looking guy ever. He looked like a fucking pimp. Like, he looked so fucking cool. And he took a good ass whipping too. WrestleMania 3, Tito ripped his clothes off in Detroit.
Now, help me out on a piece of trivia. He is related, Slick is, to somebody else in the wrestling business.
It's one of those things I still to this day don't know if it's true or not. The rumor was he was the son of Rufus R. Jones.
That's right. I've heard that, and I'm not sure whether that is legitimate or not either. I don't. As a matter of fact,
Let me see.
Rufus was from Kansas City or from the Central States originally.
And that's where he started. Remember, Slick was managing in Kansas City before he went to the WWF.
Yeah. Does Wikipedia have anything to say about this?
Oh, Kenneth Wayne Johnson, born December 8th, 1957, is an American retired professional wrestling manager, better known by the ring name Slick. He was best known for his appearances with the World Wrestling Federation in the late 80s and early 90s. He is the son of professional wrestler Rufus R. Jones.
Well, now, Wikipedia sometimes, as we know, can be altered or changed or wrong or whatever, but I've heard that story many times before. And, Rufus R. Jones, you know what the R stands for? Guts.
Well,
that was a legitimate promo line he did. It's Rufus R. Jones, baby. You know what the R stands for is guts. And I'm coming after you.
He was a wrestler that if they had closed captioning back then, it would have been amazing to see. I got one interview where he's talking about wrestling Dory Fun Jr. and Jake the Snake Robbins. I was like, that sounds like a hell of a match. But go ahead.
Just because I got to see Rufus R. Jones came in and worked Memphis on top in 1974 and had a couple matches for the Southern title with Lawler. And so I got to see him very early in my fandom. And the promos, like he was talking to, it was like Thunderbolt in a different way. He was talking to his audience and they bought it. And he was one of them. He was a white bread baby face. Well, maybe that's not the right description, but he was a baby face through and through. But if you got him mad and he flipped out, then he started the headbutts and the whole 9 yards. And the promos were something to behold. You couldn't really understand them, but you couldn't turn away from them at the same time. But in today's environment, can you imagine? Rufus's work, you had to believe in him to look past the work because it was bloody brutal. But people went crazy because they believed in him.
Just for the record, I have an article here. Rufus was the king of wrestling from Charleston, South Carolina, the Post and Courier, November 27, 1993.
Yeah.
Jones leaves behind 3 grown daughters, Melanie, Crystal, and Kendall. He also had an adopted son, the Reverend Kenneth Johnson, better known to wrestling fans as the Reverend Slick.
There you go, adopted son. There you go. But yeah, he was huge in the Carolinas, huge at one time in Memphis, and all over the South, in the Central States especially. But boy, the match, it was hard to have a match with Rufus R. Jones, but it would draw.
Well, Jim, speaking of a match, I don't know if we could say it drew. It was an interesting time, and it was a good show. But things happened. I have a couple figures here that tie to you and your past.
Uh-oh.
From the WWE Ultimate Edition line, a brand new Yokozuna action figure. From what I understand, you have seen one of these.
Yes, I have.
It is Yokozuna with 3 optional heads that you could switch. You could switch. One of them, he looks like he's angry. One of them, he looks kind of calm. One of them, maybe he's taking a dump. Also,
it's the degree of the space that his mouth is open. His mouth is pretty much closed on one, halfway open on the other, and all the way growling on the other.
This comes with the Yokozuna robe and the basket of rice, I guess. I'm not sure exactly what this is, as well as a WWF Classic Winged Eagle. That is the name. I can't speak, ladies and gentlemen. Championship belt. Any thoughts on the Yokozuna figure? What do you think? How do you think it looks, considering you were the man walking him to the ring?
Well, it doesn't look exactly like Yoko because Yoko had a few more wrinkles and folds, but it's only 6 inches high, so you get the picture. But yeah, I'm appreciating now, and you've got me started on this. I'm getting at least an action figure of everybody I ever managed, or at least remember managing. And fortunately, I was able to get one of these and a few others. That's the thing, is that at that point in the mid-90s, the WWF business was down, and I don't think that Yoko and some of those guys that were there in that window, 93, 94, 95, really got merchandised all they could have then. And I assume that there's some agreement with the family for some of these things that are being put out now, but it's nice to see guys, especially guys like that aren't here anymore, getting their fair due. And of course, the Midnight Express figures that are available at JimCornette.com fit into the same category.
That's right. You can open them up and have Yokozuna squash all of them and choose Cornette for his own.
Hey, goddammit.
But Jim, I said I have another figure that ties into this. Also just released by WWE, is from the WWE Elite SummerSlam line, a 1993 Lex Luger SummerSlam figure. So you have now Yokozuna and Luger. It has the red, white, and blue protective pad over the steel plate in his elbow, as well as the entire outfit he wore that day.
Does it also have the 25,000 balloons that they drop from the ceiling when he, for whatever reason, acts like he believes he won the title even though he knows the rules of wrestling?
What did you think of the whole protective pad over the steel plate thing?
Well, that wasn't bad because it was legitimate. And they first brought it up when he was a heel, right? He didn't, when he was the narcissist. It was first mentioned, so it wasn't like, hey, we got a baby face. It's got an unfair advantage with a steel plate in his arm. But he had the motorcycle wreck, and it really was true. So using something like that that's legitimate and that you can give a guy something to hang his hat on, as JR used to say, and talk about, the commentators can talk about it. I didn't mind that. And the protective pad was something that, it would be natural for the heel or the heel manager who, he's got to keep the pad on. He's a dangerous character. But just the whole idea of making Lex the next Hulk Hogan and the Lex Express and the bus and the finish to prolong the chase until Vince gave up on prolonging his affection for Luger, that was doomed. That was the biggest build-up to a popcorn fart that's ever been.
Could it have been done without the whole patriotic edge to it? Because that's the part that really was preposterous. It wasn't that Luger turned babyface, that all of a sudden he's patriotic in 93 when no one was at war with Japan. And it turned into this summer-long thing about raising patriotism when that really wasn't an issue in the summer of 93. So the timing of it was also kind of curious.
Vince loved and again, in wrestling, there's reason to, understand why he would love it. The idea of the anti-American foreign menace. And with Yokozuna having held the belt hostage and, blah, blah, blah. The 4th of July body slam on the deck of the battleship Intrepid. Everybody remembers that. That was a great way to turn babyface.
By the way, hosted by Todd Pettingill.
That was good. And see, the thing is, they started it for, even if we weren't at war with Japan, here's this fucking world champion in WWF saying nobody can body slam me. Nobody can beat me. I'm the world champion. He's theoretically making more money than anybody else because he's the champion. So it made sense that Luger, this giant bodybuilding powerhouse, would come out. I can body slam your big fat ass. And I'll stand up for America. But once that they then put him in the Captain America suits and put him on the bus, and it got too cheesy and too much for children for the emerging wrestling audience of 1993. That's where they went wrong. And he hated being on the bus, and he's admitted he hated going out and doing all these personal appearances and meeting people because Lex was not a people person back then. And
now he seems like the nicest guy I've ever seen every time I see him interviewed.
Well, yes. I mean, he's in his old age, and he's same age as me approximately, but he's had health issues, but he has realized, maybe he came off a little standoffish in the past in wrestling, blah, blah, blah. And he's a wonderful person. And he was always an easy guy to like if you could understand he came from a different background and wasn't indoctrinated in wrestling from the word go and a blah, blah, blah. But that was the thing is he didn't connect with the people as a babyface because he wasn't comfortable with it. As an aloof, arrogant, superior acting heel, that's where he came off more natural, not necessarily because he was a prick, but because he was so perfect and accomplished and looked so good and was kind of standoffish that you could carry that off easier, if that kind of it conveys it properly.
I think so. Jim, we have two more figures to talk about. One, once again, this is one that ties to you, and I know you have a couple of these in your possession. We want to thank Sean Ing and our friends at Kayfabe Heroes, KWK, for sending these over. The brand new Mike Mantaur Halleck action figure, complete with Moose Cholak Boar's head. What do you call it? Not boar, moose head, I guess.
No, well, Yukon Moose Cholak had an actual moose head. I don't think that Mantaur's head was a moose head. I think his was some type of grizzly bear or fucking giant animal from Grecian mythology that, I don't even know if it was at one time real. I never investigated the goddamn thing. I never perused it or smelled it or petted its fur. But it was some type of, was it kind of a bull? Did it have horns on it? The point is it was neither moose nor bull nor whatever. It was a Mantaur. And that's, again, Vince was wrapped up with the idea that, well, he's like a centaur in mythology. He's part human and he's part horse. But in this case, he's a man and a tar.
Yeah, why wouldn't a centaur be called a Mantaur then, right?
Well, that exactly. Because the centaur in mythology, Centaur, was the mythical part horse, part man. Centaur. Mantaur was he was part man, but he wasn't part horse. Was he part bull? Well, what does the bull have to do with the tar? So they basically just beat the tar out of him. But no, bless Mike's little pea-picking heart. It was about 10 years too late in wrestling for that gimmick. It might have got over in the 80s, although, again, Mike, maybe he was uncomfortable with it, but the work was not the best. The timing was not the best. And it was one of those mid-90s WWF things that did not get over and never stood a chance of getting over. Freddie Joe Floyd, the Goon, Jim Neidhart as Who was just a rib because they couldn't trust him to be Jim Neidhart.
Because they couldn't trust him to be Jim Neidhart? What do you mean?
Well, they didn't want to advertise because they knew that Jim was in a situation in his life where he was probably going to do something to embarrass himself or other people. But they wanted to give him a job because of who he was in a relationship with the Hart family. So they put him under a mask and called him Who. And that way, when he fucked up, where's Who? He's gone. It wasn't like Jim Neidhart fucked up again. But nevertheless, all those midnight TL Hopper, whatever, Vince was just, it wasn't working. The time had passed. And, as another gimmick, he might have done better, but this thing was just visually ridiculous. And Vince loved that kind of shit.
Well, speaking of visually, you managed him. How do you think the figure looks? Does it match the aura of Mantaur?
It does everything except the odor of Mantaur. No, it does. It's a very nice looking representation of a very large animal skin clad human being. And that, and now remember they wrote in after we talked about him last time and said he was there for like 9 months. I can't remember still. I've got to go back and have somebody do the research, but I swear to God, I've only managed him like 2 or 3 times. I cannot remember any more than that. And it was a rib, I think, on me, probably by our friend, the Artful Dodger, Bruce Pritchard. Yeah, because at first when they say you're going out with Mantaur, okay, right, yeah, good written. No, you are. And I looked on the wall, and there my name was with him on the sheet. Shit, now my name's on the wall. I got to go.
Do you say anything to him before you go out there? I mean, what was it like when you met him?
Hey, Mike, I'll be managing you tonight. Okay, good. It was a squash match. I didn't need to know anything. I was on the booking team or creative team or whatever they were calling us at the time. So it's not like he was going to say no. I wish he had of, because I've been being ribbed about it for 30 years after that. But he's, okay. He thought probably if they were putting a member of the creative team as his manager, that was a good sign for him. He didn't know that they were doing it to rib me.
All right. Well, Jim, as we wrap this up, once again, we want to thank Sean Ng and everyone over there for sending over some copies of this. We really do appreciate it. For U.S. collectors, you can order their stuff at the Asylum Wrestling Store or directly from, I believe it's KWK. It was somewhere in this email. It's kwk.com. I think so. Maybe. ShopKWK.com. That's what it is. Thank you for sending those over. And speaking of action figures, Jim, one more time, where can the listeners get the Midnight Express, the Heavenly Bodies, Jim Cornette, so much more?
Well, they can get either Eaton and Lane or Eaton and Condrey or Lane and Pritchard, the Heavenly Bodies, or all 4 of us, Lane, Eaton, Condrey, and Cornette in the 4-pack, along with autographed pictures and books and so much more at JimCornette.com. For heaven's sake, how can you miss this opportunity?
Well, you know, Jim, luckily enough, the Midnight Express, of course, through Jim Cornette, their manager, licensed all their stuff officially. Everyone we just talked about, officially licensed, but every now and then some bootleg motherfucker shows up and tries to take advantage of people. In that case, you need to sue.
That's right. And if you need to sue some bootleg son of a bitch that is selling your figure or your likeness or whatever in plastic or other artificial materials around the world, then I know the man you need to call.
Call Stephen P. News. If you need to sue. An outlaw mud show or two. Those are the rest.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, if you've been the victim of improper action figure sales or any other type of improper activity involving your rights, privileges, or ability to remain alive in this ever-dangerous world, then Stephen P. New at newlawoffice.com, 877-50-STEVE is the man for you. You know, there was a big article just recently, Brian, on Stephen P. New in the Beckley Register Herald, which is the newspaper of record over there in Beckley, West Virginia. And the headline was, Yeet! Steve New is all in on law, career, and pro wrestling. And we will, or you will remember, dear listeners, that there was a Yeet controversy back several months ago where an innocent independent wrestler had copyrighted or trademarked, whatever the proper phrase is, the word yeet, when all of a sudden here came Jey Uso and the big marketing machine, and after Stephen P. New got involved, not only was yeet able to be used once again by Jey Uso and the WWE, but that independent wrestler is now going into business with Vince McMahon and buying his own fucking wrestling promotion because he got a couple of $1 billion out of it too.
I don't think he got that much, but Stephen did a good job for his client, as he always does.
Well, he did. You know, at $2 billion, more or less, give or take. But it's a great article. Everybody, I think it's online. They can look it up, the Beckley Register Herald. But it talks about not only Stephen's wrestling connections, but also some of the good public works that he has done for the communities in West Virginia, and as well as obviously, Brian being the attorney of record of you and I, as well as CM Punk, Ace Steel, and a few other people, and a variety of these matters, it's an interesting read. But if you don't want to read about him, if you want to see him in action, retain this son of a bitch to sue somebody and sit back and watch the fireworks. NewLawOffice.com, 877-50-STEVE. He's a coal miner's son, and he'll go to the mines for you and come out with gold.
That's right. Stephen P. New. He will kick some ass.
Either that or he'll just go down somebody's throat and come out with their gold fillings. But one way or another, he's getting you some gold.
Stephen P. New, once again, 877-50-STEVE, which we submitted to and gave up as the official number.
And also, he will throw the silver fillings away because they ain't worth shit anymore.